What about Christmas Eve? When you were growing up, did you guys have a snack before you went to bed that night?
I forget.
What was Jean Benet's favorite snack?
I don't think he had a
Some moms cut up apples.
Yeah.
What else would she do? Fruit moms.
That's all I know. Pineapple.
Pineapple.
Yeah.
You mentioned that once before. Is that kind of a favorite?
Yeah.
Kind of thing?
Really favorite thing.
Is that probably the most favorite?
Apples or pineapple. Probably.
So if you pay careful attention to that segment, what do you notice? Well, it starts off with Burke saying, I don't think John Bonet had a favorite snack. And it ends with him being quite clear that a favorite snack was pineapple. And this brings us back to that original question, is Burke believable? Is Burke credible? And now I want to take you to an interesting article written by Matt Sebastian from the Boulder Daily Camera. Child interviews can be tricky. And this interview is specifically relating to this interview with Burke Ramsey. Let's read a segment. Investigators probing the 1996 murder of John Bonet Ramsey had long sought to re-interview the slain 6-year-old's older brother, a request that was finally granted earlier this month. But experts say questioning a child of Burke Ramsey's age, 11 years old, is a risky proposition. Remember, this is 1998. I don't like interviewing kids when I don't have to, said Brent Turvey, a California-based criminal profiler and forensic scientist. It's a very tricky proposal and one I'm not comfortable with. The susceptibility of children to suggestion while being questioned, in addition to difficulty in reconstructing long-term memories, can be dangerous, Turvey said. And so that is really the issue here. Is what we're seeing here an example of Burke being vulnerable to suggestion or not? And I think the key part is, if you pay attention to the questions, does Dan Schuller ever mention the word pineapple, or does Burke Ramsey volunteer it?
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. So the article goes on to note what we already know. Burke was interviewed for 6 hours on June 10th, 11th and 12th. That's 2 hours on each one of those days. And then this is something perhaps you don't know. A child interviewing expert, that's Dan Schuller, from the Broomfield Police Department, he questioned Burke basically as the district attorney's representative, while the boy's attorney, that's Jim Jenkins, and a member of Boulder County District Attorney's Office watched from another room. Of course, Jane Harmer was there as well. Further down in the article, the problem with interviewing children, according to Turvey and University of Washington psychology and law professor Elizabeth Loftus, stems from outside influences that can shape recollections. They are vulnerable to suggestions from the interrogation and from external sources, such as other people, the media. So the critical question here is, what is their authentic original memories, and what is some kind of interference, some kind of influence contaminating that narrative? Turvey said that children are also very eager to please and could pick up on the types of answers an interviewer is seeking and then shape responses to the examiner's liking. Even regular people going into a lineup are susceptible to the subtle approval given by law enforcement when you pick the right person. They then go on to say perhaps that's why Broomfield Police Detective Dan Schuller questioned Burke. In other words, someone who basically had virtually no knowledge of the Ramsey case. I mean, they pertinently note here that Schuller didn't investigate the killing. And if you ask me, there's something crazy about that. You've got a detective questioning a witness, and he isn't actually investigating the case himself. In other words, he lacks a lot of insight, doesn't he? Then they also note the problem with the reliability of memory after considerable passage of time. And so what's the considerable passage of time here? 1.5 years. And so you can definitely make the argument, you can definitely side with Burke and say, if you've made a mistake, if you said something that's not true or not correct, well, maybe it was just your memory that's faulty. And this is the problem with allowing an interview to be delayed by 18 months. Now you can't tell the difference between someone who's obfuscating, deliberately trying not to provide information, and someone who is legitimately fuzzy on the details. And this is where we need to do really intuitive statement analysis and look at the kind of person Burke Ramsey is, his attention to detail, and whether it is more likely or not that the whole pineapple thing is something that he ought to have remembered or something that he's perhaps hiding away. And so as we go further into this analysis, I want you to think about 3 questions. Number 1, is Burke an important witness in this case? Number 2, can Burke be an important witness in this case? And number 3, should Burke be an important witness in this case? Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you find this analysis worthwhile, please hit the thanks button and let's get started. So I do want to come back to this Daily Camera article. There's a very, very important bit of information near the end of it. I'll put a link to that in the description. But first we need to revisit PINEAPPLEGATE. And it's really this question, can Burke remember eating pineapple on Christmas night? We know John Bonet did. We know his fingerprints. We know Burke's fingerprints on the bowl. Can he remember? If he can't remember, is that a sign of deception or is that a sign of just faulty memory? What is that a sign of? Again, it's this question, is Burke an important witness in this case? And so I think one way of establishing this is looking at the kind of memory Burke has with regard to other things. If you ask the question, can Burke really not remember eating pineapple? And I think on Dr. Phil, he said something like, would you remember what you ate on Christmas or something? And although that's quite a valid question, in the Ramsey's own book, they talk about making pancakes for Christmas, and that book was written something like 3 years after the fact.
Is on the internet. And listen, this is the missing link. For 20 years, this thing has been grinding, but the missing link is Burke. No one has ever spoken. There are these 3 tapes. The tape with the psychologist, 2 tapes with the police. One that the
interrogation tape.
Interrogation tapes. One the parents say was illegally gotten. And we have all 3 of those tapes, and I'm going to show those with him watching them for the first time. So it's interesting to see him watch himself.
I was going to say, what's his reaction? Because here he is, and there's a little boy and talking to investigators.
Right, and he talks about what he was feeling at that time, and he remembers those interviews. And he's going to talk and give a very significant answer about the pineapple that supposedly was found, a bowl of pineapple was found on a table in the house that was not there when everyone went to bed, and pineapple was found during the autopsy in her stomach. Did you and she eat pineapple together at any time during the day?
Maybe.
Now, I mentioned earlier this idea of testing Burke's memory in other areas. How detailed is his memory? And if it's anything like John and Patsy's, well, I think it can be quite detailed. So let's have a look. When did you wake up the first time? Burke Ramsey, 5 a.m. because it was Christmas. So Burke can actually remember the time, this was in 1998, the time that he woke up on Christmas. You can remember the exact time 2 years later. And what did you do? Did you wake John Bonet up? She looked like she was in a pretty deep sleep, so I waited a few minutes before I woke up. Think about that detail. 2 years later, he remembers that she was in a pretty deep sleep, that he waited a few minutes and then woke her up. And then what did you do? And then we went to wake Mom and Dad. They slept in till inaudible, and then we went down and opened all the presents. Burke could also remember putting his hands on, it sounds like, the handlebars of his brand new bike. What do you remember about that morning and about the fun things that you had that you were doing that day? Burke says, I just remember first going on the bike and sitting on it. And then he mimes holding the handlebars of a bike. And again, you might say, I don't know why you're talking about the bike narrative. I don't know why. Well, Burke himself is talking about it. Burke himself volunteers this particular memory. But then when he's asked about the last time he saw John Bonet alive, then there's very little detail. Dan Schiller says, let me ask, when was the last time that you saw John Bonet alive? Burke pauses. He says, probably in the car. Then he pauses. He says, tired, laying down. Dan Schiller, okay. Burke, mumbling. That's what I remember. And then he remembers the moment his mother came into his room after she found John Bonet was gone. He describes Patsy almost mockingly as going psycho. And 20 years later, when he was on Dr. Phil, he describes this moment with a big smile. Something else that I didn't note in the previous analysis is the reenactment shows Patsy opening the door, or basically going into John Bonet's room, and the room is in darkness, right? And so you could argue it was dark, and Patsy opens the door. How did she know John Bonet wasn't in the room if it's dark, right? The other thing is, in police photos, the light is on in the room, and so the question is, who turned that light on? And so it's a bedside table light. There is no light at the door to turn on. So you have to go into the room to right beside John Bonet's bed to turn that light on. And what that implies, in a sense, the fact that that light, that bedside table light is on, is that if no one turned it on, then it means it was on the whole night. And if it was on the whole night, it meant John Bonet never went to bed in that bedroom, because the light was never turned off. It was never turned off because it was on the whole time. It was never turned off, and it was never turned on because it was on the whole time. Now, don't forget, our mission in this particular analysis is to ask and answer the question, is Burke an important witness? Should he be an important witness? Can he be an important witness? And think about the level of detail he provides even 20 years later, when he can tell the length of time when the officer arrived. He can also tell the first time that he woke up in this version of events is that when Patsy arrived in his bedroom, kind of flustered, but doesn't actually say anything to him, and he says nothing to her. And I do think this question achieves an astonishing amount of impetus, in a sense, when you say, could Burke be an important witness? When you think about what was the normal habit about turning the light off in her bedroom? Who would normally do that? Did she like sleeping with the light on? Did she like sleeping with the door open? And so this is what Burke said to Dan Schiller about John Bonet's bedroom. Schiller says, this bedroom? Burke says, I would sometimes sleep on, I forget which bed, but I would sometimes sleep in there because mine got cold. Now, bear in mind what Burke's saying is, he's saying, I would sleep in John Bonet's bedroom, and then he says, I forget which bed. Do you think that that is likely? Because there's only 2 beds in that bedroom, and John Bonet usually slept in one particular bed. So how could he not know which bed he slept in? So I think the question arises here, is he trying to avoid that question? And then let's go to Steve Thomas's John Bonet inside the Ramsey murder investigation. He said that his sister fell asleep in the car on the way home, but awakened to help carry presents into the house of a friend. Huh. And wouldn't that mean carrying presents into the house and perhaps receive presents as well? And which house was this? Which friend was this? Right, we've dealt with all of this. And that then brings us to PINEAPPLEGATE, what we really want to talk about. And let's look at how Lawrence Schiller in Perfect Murder, Perfect Town deals with this part. Quote, the most delicate part of the interview, that's Dan Schiller talking to Burke in June 1998, was getting Burke to answer questions without revealing what the police knew. So he didn't want to ask him specifically about pineapple, but he kind of did. So he says, first he was asked if he ate any pineapple and when he went to bed. He didn't remember. Now, I don't know whether that is accurate. I don't know whether Burke was ever asked if he ate any pineapple. We certainly don't have that part of the transcript. Then Schiller goes on to note in Perfect Murder, Perfect Town, what did he and his father talk about when they played with his Christmas gift that night? And so what's going on here is this idea that Burke and his father are playing late at night with a particular Christmas gift. And I can't help thinking, could that be an analogy for Burke playing with a Christmas gift but perhaps not with his father, perhaps with someone else. And perhaps that Christmas gift was the Nintendo 64, which was a blockbuster gift it was sold out all over the place. It was a very sought after gift in 1996. And so he says, well, all that they talked about was that it was time for bed. Then Schuller asked, what happened after Burke went to bed? Did he have any dreams? Did he hear anything in his sleep? Burke said that he heard voices in the distance. Maybe it was a dream, maybe not. It was so long ago, he said. And this, again, is a very valid response. I can't really remember. It was so long ago. And that is the problem with allowing so much time, because you can kind of leave that door open and say, yeah, maybe he doesn't know. Now, of course, if the cops were trying to preserve their case, 2 weeks later, when Lou Smith interviewed John, he generously gave away the farm, handing the Ramseys arguably the most inculpatory evidence on a silver platter. Lou Smith says, we don't know. The pineapple is inside her. In other words, he's talking about the autopsy evidence. So we have to figure out how that pineapple got there. So in other words, he's saying we've got to find some kind of explanation for how that pineapple got there. Otherwise, you folks might be in some trouble. There is one way it could get there. She had to eat it at some point. John Ramsey, are you sure it was pineapple? That's also legally a very important, pertinent, and sensitive point. Lou Smith answers yes. John Ramsey, no question. Lou Smith, no question. And so Lou Smith is giving away so much evidence that they're trying not to give to Burke. Well, now they're just literally handing it over to the Ramseys. This, in a very real sense, is the strongest evidence that kind of casts doubt on the Ramsey story. That John Bonet was sleeping. Of course, something else that is excluded from the grand jury comments seems to be the notion that anyone else besides John and Patsy were under suspicion. And I do think we need to deal with this. We need to deal with this from kind of a legal perspective. And it could be that because Burke was under 10, even if he did anything, the law simply doesn't recognize anything he did as criminal. And so Burke then automatically, by default, goes completely beyond the purview of any legal investigation. He can't even be seen as a suspect. The most he can ever be seen is as an important witness. Now, on the other hand, it may be that the grand jury, while rejecting the intruder theory, which I believe was a step in the right direction, then assumed John Bonet was killed by either one of her parents. I'm not sure if that was a step in the right direction, and if that is where they were going, no wonder they couldn't make up their mind regarding the perpetrator. John or Patsy, Patsy or John, both or neither. Of course, James Kolar also investigated this case, and he made a document, he prepared a document that outlined his theoretical concept of the events that took place. I think this is from page 420. And so he expressed the following to Garnett and Beckner. He said, the theory of family involvement was supported by witness interviews, Ramsey statements, forensic findings, fingerprints, trace evidence, and I must say I find the fingerprints thing quite interesting. And then he also says identifiable childhood pathology that explained the circumstances leading up to and surrounding the death of John Bonet. Look at those words, childhood pathology. And of course, we know what happened to James Kolar, who participated in that CBS docuseries. He was one of the many people sued as part of that series. Now, I'm not going to take it further than that, but I do want to bring up this quote from the Daily Camera. While it's not known whether investigators got what they wanted from their interview with Burke, sources have told the Daily Camera the child's parents, in other words, John and Patsy, allowed Burke to be questioned in the hope that they could avoid him appearing in front of the grand jury, right? And guess what? He was summoned by the grand jury to address them on a host of different things. The article goes on to note, Jim Jenkins, Burke's Atlanta-based attorney, has said that he was pleased with the interviews but wouldn't comment on the possibility of a grand jury subpoena for his client. Interesting. Right, so I'm not going to take it further than that. What do you think? Is Burke an important witness in this case? Can he be an important witness? Has he been? And then also, should he be? And so we're going to conclude with these original 6 insights from Burke's 6-hour interrogation with the remaining 3 in the next analysis. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.